I'm Rachel Lawson, 39 years old, and at my niece's birthday party, my mother leaned in and whispered, "Don't let the children see those scars. It's upsetting." Before I could respond, my sister grabbed my arm and hissed, "Cover them up! You're ruining the photos." They spoke like I was something to hide, not someone who belonged. But when a silver-haired man in a military blazer noticed the faint outline of the tattoo on my arm, the noise in the room stopped. He looked straight at me, and everything I thought would happen that night started to shift. Before I go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from, and hit like if you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong in your own family. The invitation had come in a cream envelope, the kind my sister loved to use for events where appearances mattered. It arrived 2 days before the party addressed to Rachel Lawson, in a shaky hand, like someone had rewritten it too many times. Inside was a formal card for my father's birthday celebration, RSVP, already checked yes in someone else's handwriting. I stood in my kitchen turning it over, unsure why I was even considering going. Still, I packed a small bag and stared at the brown handkerchief resting on top of my VA paperwork. It wasn't decorative, just a square of coarse cloth stained with iodine and embroidered by a medic in Iraq who didn't make it back. I took it with me, not to honor the memory exactly, but to cover the scar that ran from my wrist to my elbow, a scar my family had always treated like a problem they wished would go away. The drive to Fairfax took a little over an hour. October leaves flared red and gold along the interstate, but my palms stayed clenched around the steering wheel. I pulled into the event hall right before sunset. Valets in matching vests moved Teslas and luxury SUVs with polished ease. When I handed off the keys to my dusty Toyota pickup, the young man raised his eyebrows but said nothing. Inside, chandeliers sparkled over tables draped in gold. I spotted my sister Celine almost immediately, ivory dress, perfectly done, hair smile, ready for the donors. "You made it," she said, in a tone meant to be heard by the right people. Her hug was light fingers brushing my shoulder like touching. Too long might leave a mark. "Photos start in 20. You brought something to cover that, right?" She nodded at my arm before turning away. I didn't answer. I just moved toward the bar and ordered club soda. Someone nearby asked if I was one of the caterers. I said no, then stepped aside and watched Wade, my brother-in-law, holding court near the punch bowl. Celine's younger sister served somewhere overseas. "Right," he said, laughing into his drink. The photographer called for immediate family. I ended up holding my father's cane while they arranged him in the shot. When I stepped beside Celine, she said, "Other side, Rachel. The light's better for smooth skin." I shifted left, then a little farther, until I was nearly behind a potted palm. The camera flashed. My sleeve slipped slightly, just enough for the edge of the scar to show. Celine's smile broke. "Cover it up," she whispered. "You're ruining the photos." I didn't say a word, just reached into my purse and pulled out the handkerchief. Tied it slow, steady. The cloth rough against my skin, the knot familiar. The photographer cleared his throat. "Perfect," he said before snapping the next picture. Later, I stood alone at the reserved table. Champagne flutes clinked in the background. My sister stood at the podium and raised her glass. To the women who hold this family together, she said, her eyes locking on mine. Strength comes in many forms. And that's when I saw him, the older man near the back of the room. Gray hair, upright posture, a small Vietnam pin on his lapel. He was watching me, not with pity, but with the kind of focus I remembered from the field, the kind you used when something important moved in your line of sight. He stood up, took his cane, and started walking toward me. And that was the moment everything began to change. He moved with purpose, slow but certain cane tapping once for every few steps. The room around us seemed to fade. Conversations fell into murmurs, then silence. Even the quartet paused, as if waiting. He stopped just in front of me, eyes, steady voice, low. "Ma'am," he said, with the gravel of someone used to early mornings, and command, "May I see the rest of that stitching?" My hand instinctively tightened over the cloth. I didn't answer right away. I could have just nodded politely and stepped back. But something about the way he stood, shoulders straight, no apology in his stance, made me reach up and pull the handkerchief down just an inch, enough for the outline of the falcon to show. Talons clutching a bolt of lightning, the old unit tattoo still faint but unmistakable. He drew in a breath, held it for a second longer than expected, then leaned in just close enough so only I could hear him. "Last week, shadow holds." It had been 9 years since I heard the call and response. I didn't hesitate. Midnight waits, mission done. He straightened slowly, his face softer now. His eyes scanned the room before he turned slightly and raised his voice. "Ghost echo. Declassified Tuesday." It rippled through the space. First confusion, then curiosity, then stillness. The general turned toward the crowd and continued steady and clear. This woman served in the finest casualty extraction unit our army ever deployed. The fork in someone's hand clattered against a plate. A couple near the corner of the room whispered. Celine stood motionless, hand resting against her necklace lips, parted as if words had failed her. The general looked back at me and nodded once. Kandahar, August 06. Ghost Echo pulled 3 of my men from a hot zone. Only a handful of medics made it back. She was one. I didn't move. I wasn't sure how. I heard the first clap from the left side of the room, then another. It built slowly, unsure at first, but then it swelled. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Celine's voice broke through it. "Well," she said with a smile too bright, "I guess even black sheep get medals." Mom gave a laugh that didn't match the moment, squeezing Celine's arm like they were trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. Dad stepped away from the table, holding his phone to his ear, pretending to take a call. My niece tugged at my sleeve. "Aunt Rachel, did it hurt some?" I opened my hand so she wouldn't see how tight my fingers had curled. The general guided me toward a hallway off the main room, past framed photos of charity events and anniversary celebrations, with polished smiles but no trace of uniform or service. We stopped under a brass sconce. He turned toward me. "You treated Lieutenant Carter," he said. "My godson. He's a trauma surgeon now, thanks to you." He paused, hesitating just enough that I knew what was coming next. "He wrote your folks, several times. You never got those letters." I shook my head. I was told the mail got lost. Overseas processing or something. His mouth pressed into a thin line. "They didn't lose them," he said. "They hid them. And your commendation packet. It didn't stall by accident. Carter's been digging. There was a political shuffle. Your name got caught in it." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a card. "If you want it out in the open, I know someone who can help. An attorney who handles these cases, quiet or loud. Your choice." I took the card, fingers brushing the raised print. "Send me the number." Back in the main room, Celine was talking to the event photographer, nodding toward the table I'd just left. He glanced at his camera, tapped the screen. Something felt off. The general touched my shoulder before I stepped forward. "You don't owe them silence." Inside the room had shifted. The conversations now had a different flavor, polite but unsure. Guests stopped to offer congratulations, to thank me. Their voices soft, uncertain. I responded kindly, keeping my tone even. We learned that in uniform. Take the thanks nod, move on. At our family table, Celine had her laptop open. She was clicking through the night's photos. Images flicked past, group shots, laughter, dancing champagne. But when the frame cycled through the section where I stood near the palm, I wasn't in them. Each photo had a gap, an absence, like someone had taken an eraser and removed me pixel by pixel. One by one, she highlighted the shots and pressed delete. Her head tilted slightly when she realized I was watching. "Just trimming duplicates," she said sweetly. "No reason to keep extra frames." "You mean the ones with me in them?" She gave a soft shrug. "If that's how you see it." She tapped again. The smile never reached her eyes. "You got your moment. Let's not make it awkward." Behind her, the general had found Dad near the bar. They were speaking in low tones. Dad didn't look pleased. Celine reached again for the trackpad, and I placed my hand on hers, firm, not forceful. The edge of the handkerchief brushed her wrist. "There's nothing redundant about the truth." She didn't move her hand, but her voice dropped barely above a whisper. "Watch me." And she kept tapping. One image after another disappeared until there was no evidence I'd been part of that evening at all. I blinked, unsure whether I'd actually seen what I just saw. But there it was. My sister deleting me like lint off a clean blouse. I stepped closer. "Why are you doing that?" I asked, voice low but clear. She didn't look up. "You ruin the symmetry." Wade, lounging by the punch bowl, let out a short laugh. "She's not wrong," he said. "Kinda throws off the whole aesthetic." I leaned in close enough for her to hear every word. "You're deleting me, just like you did after Mom's stroke." She froze, briefly, then resumed. "You're still on that." I didn't answer right away. The memory rushed back before I could stop it. I'd flown home on emergency leave boots, still dusty from a base halfway around the world. No one picked me up. No one even told me Mom was in the ICU until 2 days after she was admitted. When I arrived, the nurse looked surprised. "They said you wouldn't be coming," she'd said. "They told us you were unreachable." Back in the present, Celine finally looked up. "We didn't think you'd show," she said flat. "You disappear for years, then come back like the wounded one." I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice calm. "You had every way to reach me. You chose not to." She lifted one eyebrow as if I were a receipt she forgot to throw away. The room had begun to shift. Cousins and aunts lingered near the dessert table, casting sidelong glances. Wade stepped in again, chuckling. "You act like this place owes you something, like your war stories even matter here." That one hit harder than I wanted it to. Dad moved toward us, not to intervene, but to quiet it down. "Let's not make a scene," he said. Celine gave a small, victorious nod. "Exactly." From somewhere nearby, someone muttered, "This is why we don't tell her things. She always makes it a thing." I turned slowly. No one met my eyes. And then the projector screen lit up. A slideshow. Family vacations, holidays, birthday candles, backyard parties, faces smiling, arms wrapped around each other. Not one of them included me. Even the 4th of July photo one I remembered clearly had been edited. Celine and Wade laughing on either side of what should have been me, now cropped perfectly, the sparkler I held no longer in frame. I stood still as polite applause moved through the room. The noise blurred into a low hum. I turned, stepped quietly out of the room, and walked down the hallway to the coat check. My jacket was where I'd left it, buried behind a mink someone had dusted off for the occasion. I reached into the inside pocket and felt a crinkle. A plain envelope. No return address. No handwriting I recognized. I opened it. Inside were 2 folded pages, a photocopy of my discharge papers. Except, not quite. The title had been changed. My role now read Logistics Support. No mention of field medic. No commendations listed. The unit name blurred into a code. Someone had altered it, and I knew exactly who. I sat down on the bench, envelope still in my hands. The light in the hallway flickered once, then steadied. And I knew right then this wasn't just about being forgotten. They hadn't just erased me from pictures. They had rewritten my record. The house was quieter when I stepped inside. Most of the guests were still outside on the patio, their voices low and jittery like they were trying to patch over what had just happened. I walked through the kitchen without speaking. My mother stood at the counter wiping it down with a dish towel that didn't need to be used. She didn't look up when I said her name. "Mom, what's the second fund?" Her hand slowed for a beat, then resumed its rhythm. She turned around with a smile that had been rehearsed too many times. "It was just a small backup your father set up, for emergencies. That's all." I folded my arms. "Why didn't I know about it?" She shrugged too quickly. "You were deployed. There was no need to trouble you with all those details." "That wasn't your decision to make," I said quietly. "Where is it?" She waved a hand like she was brushing away smoke. "I'm sure it's closed by now. It was never anything big." But something behind her eyes shifted. Not confusion, not surprise. Something heavier. I left without saying another word and walked down the hallway to my father's old office. The door was closed. I hadn't been in that room since before my second tour. I opened the drawer near the sideboard, the one where he used to keep a spare key, and felt around until I found it. The office smelled like old books and stale aftershave. Nothing had changed. Not the framed photo from a summer barbecue back in '92, not the certificate on the wall from a veterans support group he used to donate to. I knelt by the filing cabinet and unlocked the bottom drawer. The folders inside were neatly labeled. One caught my eye immediately. A. Lawson Recovery Fund. Trustee, Margaret Lawson. I pulled it out and sat in the worn office chair. The first page was a VA disability summary. Below it were monthly deposits, 15 years' worth. But every deposit was followed by a withdrawal, each one documented. Some were marked household expenses. Others had notes, Celine tuition support, Maple Ridge down payment. That was her house, the one with the wraparound porch and the custom window shutters. I turned another page. Veterans Memorial Cemetery, dual plot reservation, row E and row R. That cemetery was reserved for service members and spouses. Neither of my parents had served. I held the paper tighter. A noise left my throat quiet but not soft. I sat still for a long moment, the folder resting across my lap. Then I stood and walked back to the kitchen. The rooms were mostly empty now. I moved past the dining table into what used to be my bedroom. The paint was new, the furniture unfamiliar, but when I opened the closet, the top shelf still held the same old shoebox. I pulled it down and sat on the edge of the guest bed. Inside were letters I'd mailed home from Iraq. Most of them were unopened. There was a drawing from a little girl in Mosul, red and blue crayon, the American flag uneven but proud. A Polaroid of my squad dust on our faces, sun in our eyes. We were smiling. At the bottom of the box was a sealed white envelope addressed to my parents. I opened it carefully. Inside was a printed commendation letter from my commanding officer, dated just weeks after the Kandahar mission. The words were clear: commendation for bravery under fire, submitted with pride. They had it all this time, and never said a word. I folded the letter back into its envelope and stood. Back in the kitchen, I pulled out my phone. "Thomas," I said when my lawyer picked up, "I need you to trace every transaction connected to a trust under my name. Freeze the account, and while we're at it, I want the house appraised tonight." There was a pause, then his voice came through steady. "Understood." I slid the phone back into my pocket and laid the paperwork on the table. My hand rested on the edge of the folder. The pages shifted slightly with the draft from the hallway vent. Then another buzz from my phone. A text from my cousin Mara. "Be careful. Your dad's been asking around. Something about guardianship. Told Uncle Ron you weren't well enough to manage your own finances." The room went cold. That was the next move. I stayed up most of the night sitting at the dining table with the papers spread in front of me, the forged discharge summary, the trust withdrawals, the plot purchase, my real paperwork sitting beside it all like a witness. Sometime after midnight, I locked the door, closed the blinds, and rested my arms on the table. I whispered the same words I'd once told a medic shaking in the back of a Humvee. "Tomorrow you speak. They'll listen." At dawn, I loaded the folder into a canvas tote and drove to the county clerk's office. The courthouse square was still quiet, the flag just beginning to rise. I walked through the side entrance and waited at the front counter. The clerk was half through her coffee when I handed her the papers. "I'm filing an objection to any guardianship requests and requesting a restraining order on future petitions in my name." She scanned the first page, then the signature at the bottom. Her eyebrows lifted when she saw my father's name next to a doctor's. She called her supervisor. Within 20 minutes, my petition was stamped and sent upstairs for review. Later that morning, I met Thomas at his office. We pulled old records, cross-checked account numbers, tracked transactions. Just after noon, he looked up from his screen. "I found something." He turned the monitor toward me. A scanned guardianship letter, notarized, signed by my father and a doctor who had passed away 9 years earlier. Never filed, but still usable, still dangerous. "They kept it in their pocket," Thomas said, "ready to use when the time came." We left the office and drove across town to meet an attorney from a civil rights firm. Her name was Monica Reyes. She read the forged documents, reviewed the trust statements, and asked just one question. "Do you want this resolved quietly or publicly?" I answered without hesitation. "Publicly." By early afternoon, I was back home when my phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number. Rachel Celine's voice slid through the line. "You're really blowing this up over nothing, always making it about your trauma." I didn't reply. I opened the Messenger app and sent her the photo of the forged guardianship document. Red text beneath it read, "Nice try. See you in court." I ended the call. 15 minutes later, she walked into Thomas's office without knocking. "You ambushed us with lawyers," she said, voice sharp. I slid the printed copy of the guardianship letter across the desk. "Maybe I should have made it about your trauma," I said quietly. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. "This is private," she said. "No, this was predatory." Thomas showed her to the door. Once it closed, he turned back to me. "She's rattled." That evening, a local reporter emailed asking for a comment about possible financial exploitation. I declined the interview, but attached scanned copies of the documents. By the next morning, the veteran advocacy group confirmed they'd fund my case. They offered to cover witness fees, records access, and transportation for anyone willing to testify. Outside Thomas's office, the general shook my hand. "Told you. You're not alone." Later that night, my phone buzzed again. "Unknown number." I answered. My mother's voice was tight, like she'd been crying. "Why are you doing this to us?" I paused. "I'm doing this for me." Then I ended the call. A second text followed from my father. "You don't know what you're starting." I didn't respond. I looked around the kitchen. The same clock ticked above the stove. The air had changed, though. The weight of silence felt different now. This wasn't just about reclaiming a record. It was about making sure they never got to rewrite it again. The courthouse flag hadn't even reached half staff when I pulled into the lot. Gray clouds hung low over the square, the air damp with the smell of wet leaves. I parked beneath the old cannon that had stood watch since I was a kid, the same one we used to climb on during field trips. The folder on the seat beside me was thick with statements, forged papers, and the provisional guardianship letter Celine never expected me to see. Inside the county building, the fluorescent lights buzzed above worn linoleum. I walked straight to the clerk's window and handed over the binder. I'm filing an objection to the guardianship petition and requesting a temporary restraining order against any further filings. Under my name, I said, steady, but clear. The clerk blinked down at the top page where my father's signature sat above the name of a doctor who'd been dead 9 years. She didn't ask any questions. Instead, she called her supervisor. The emergency motion was stamped, received, and sent upstairs to the probate judge in under 20 minutes. Outside, General Loring waited near the flagpole. He didn't say anything, just nodded once when I stepped outside. We met my attorney Thomas 2 blocks over at his cramped office. The carpet still smelled faintly of copier, toner, and dust. He'd already logged into the county archives, his fingers moving fast across a keyboard that clacked like a typewriter. I paced while he scrolled through records. 40 minutes in, he stopped. "I've got something," he said, turning the screen. There it was, a notarized PDF dated 2014. Guardianship mental health provision. My father's name bold at the top. Dr. Kenneth Wilcox signed below. The same physician who passed away in 2016. The form had never been filed, but it was real enough to resurrect if someone wanted to push it through quietly. "They were waiting," I said quietly, holding it until I made too much noise. We didn't waste time. Monica Reyes, the civil rights attorney, recommended by the general, met with us that afternoon. Her office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building near the old train depot. She scanned the guardianship paperwork without blinking, then looked me in the eye. "They tried to build a cage," she said, "but it's rusted, and we're going to tear it down." She laid out what we'd need: expert witnesses, command-level verification, medical documentation from the VA, proof that I was competent, stable, and in control of my own affairs. Everything they hoped I wouldn't have. By noon the next day, my phone rang. I answered, not recognizing the number. Rachel Celine's voice came through like ice water. "You're turning this into a mess. Always about your trauma." I didn't respond. I just opened Messenger, sent her a photo of the PDF with a caption in bold red, "Nice try. See you in court." Then I ended the call. 15 minutes later, she showed up at Thomas's office without calling ahead. Her heels hit the tile like gunshots. "You ambush us with lawyers," she said, tossing her hair back. I reached into my folder and slid the printed copy of the guardianship form across the desk. "I should have made it about your trauma," I said evenly. She picked up the paper, her face paling. "This is private," she whispered. "It was never private," Thomas replied. "It was coordinated." She left without another word. The silence after the door clicked shut felt heavier than before. That afternoon, a reporter from the Fairfax Sentinel emailed asking for a statement on a developing story about financial abuse of a combat veteran. I declined the interview, but attached a few watermark scans, the trust fund withdrawals, the forged diagnosis. Just facts, no commentary. By 3, the veteran advocacy group called to confirm they were backing the case. They would cover the filing fees, the travel costs for potential witnesses, even secure expert testimony if needed. Outside, General Loring waited near the sidewalk, hands folded behind his back. "Told you," he said, offering a handshake. "You're not in this alone." That evening, I sat down at the kitchen table and began sorting everything into a binder. Discharge records, bank statements, VA communications, scanned letters from deployment, the papers layered over each other like armor. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed again. "Mom!" Her voice came through thin and unsteady. "Why are you doing this to us?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "I'm doing it for me," I said, "and for every vet who didn't have the strength to push back." She sniffed, then fell quiet. I waited. When she didn't say anything else, I ended the call. 5 minutes later, Dad texted, "You don't know what you're starting." I didn't answer. I just stood, locked the doors, and double-checked the curtains. Sometime after midnight, headlights crept up the street and stopped under the flickering lamp outside my window. A sedan, dark. No one got out. No one knocked. The engine didn't run. It just sat there. I hit record on my phone and left it on the sill. 4 hours passed. When the first thread of dawn touched the blinds, the car finally pulled away. I uploaded the footage to a secure folder and sent the link to Thomas with one note for the record. Harassment. The next night, the same car returned. No engine, no movement. Just the outline of a figure behind the windshield. I watched from behind the curtain phone camera blinking red. My pulse stayed steady. Not fear, just clarity. I wrote down the time in a notebook and underlined it twice. When the car left at 3 a.m., I already knew what I was going to do next. By morning, I was dressed and out the door before the sun fully cleared the rooftops. I took a different route to the VA center, parked at the far end of the lot. Then I called an old contact. "Dwight," I said, "I need a plate check, off the record." I read the numbers slowly. Virginia tags. 10 minutes later, he called back. "It's Jake Rowe, Arlington. You know him," I did. "A second cousin. One who sent me pictures of his new bass boat but didn't send Mom a card when she had her surgery. He's been flagged by neighborhood patrol. Twice. Near your street." I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Thanks," I said. Back inside, I borrowed a cubicle and used the office phone to call Jake from a blocked number. "Hey," I said casually. "It's Wade, Celine's husband. Need an update. Usual spot." Jake didn't miss a beat. "Yeah. She's at the VA again. Same pattern. Lives alone, most nights. Should be simple. If, well, you know." The room felt smaller. The lights overhead buzzed louder, but I kept my tone light. "Thanks." Then I hung up. From my own number, I sent Jake a text. "Coffee need to clear the air." He responded within a minute. We met at a diner not far from the river. Jake slid into the booth with the same grin he'd had since college. Cheap aftershave, worn hoodie, and too much confidence. I stirred my coffee and let him talk. Dad promised him a cut of the house. Once I was declared incompetent, everything would shift. Sell the house clear, a few debts, split the leftovers. I let him go on. Then I reached into my bag, stopped the recording on my phone, and slid it onto the table beside his mug. "That little device doesn't agree," I said. He didn't speak, just stared. "My attorney will call," I added. "If you'd like to cooperate, now's the time." Then I stood, paid for my coffee, and walked out. Back at Thomas's office, I played him the recording. "This is organized coercion," he said. "We can expand the filing, include criminal conspiracy." He copied the file, sent it to the prosecutor's office, and scheduled a hearing expansion. The judge approved it that afternoon. Public testimony. New scope. By that evening, word had already started to spread. My inbox filled with messages from veterans I hadn't spoken to in years. "You stitched my shoulder in Kabul. You pulled me out of the alley. You saved my life." The VA assigned a liaison to oversee the case. Their message was simple. "We stand with you." The walls were shifting. The silence was breaking. But we weren't at the finish line yet. The day after we filed the expanded motion, I woke early and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. The binder from the night before was still open, its pages marked with sticky tabs and clipped notes. The phone buzzed every few minutes, emails from Thomas, messages from Monica, call logs from the VA liaison. I jotted down names I hadn't spoken in years. Squad mates, medics, even a logistics officer from Kandahar who once covered for me while I performed a side alley evac under mortar fire. By lunchtime, I had a list of 12. People who could speak to my service, my judgment, my capacity. I called the first one just after noon. "Rachel." His voice cracked slightly. I heard. "Tell me where to be." The second call was shorter. "You saved my leg. Say the word." Each name brought back a face, a moment, a memory I thought I'd packed away for good. The long hallway behind the mobile field unit, the smell of burnt sand and gauze, The way we stopped using first names during rotations like that would make the losses hurt less. The testimonies began taking shape. Monica reached out to each contact and coordinated statements. Some would testify, live others remotely. All would be recorded, notarized, and submitted. We requested footage from the VA base network, filed Freedom of Information requests for the commendation that never reached me. The documentation started arriving one email at a time. That evening, I picked up a prepaid phone and called Jake one more time. He answered on the second ring. "Rachel." "Meet me," I said. "Riverside Diner, 1 hour." He showed up looking like he hadn't slept. His ball cap sat low, hands stuffed in the pockets of a windbreaker 2 sizes too big. I slid into the booth and didn't bother with small talk. "You're going to write a statement," I said. "Full account of what Dad promised. When you followed me. Every conversation." He swallowed, glancing over his shoulder. "If I say no," I reached into my purse and tapped the recorder against the table, then left it there. He picked up the pen. 2 hours later, we had his affidavit. Thomas read it 3 times, made 1 correction, then had it notarized and filed. That night, I heard from a staff sergeant who now worked in Colorado. He offered to submit deployment logs confirming my role as senior medic. He included a photo of us crouched behind a wrecked transport, the 2 of us shielding a wounded interpreter. I hadn't seen the image in years. My hands looked younger, but the focus in my eyes hadn't changed. By Friday, the VA liaison called with an update. They would provide a formal letter confirming I had no record of psychological impairment, no diagnosis on file, no red flags since discharge. They also added something else. "We've reopened your commendation file," she said. "It's being reprocessed." That evening, I answered a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Rachel Lawson," the voice asked. "Yes, this is Sergeant Major Samuel Ford. I didn't speak right away. I hadn't heard his voice since the medevac lifted him out of Kandahar, his shoulder packed with gauze I'd torn from my own sleeve." "You're testifying?" I asked. "I am." The next 2 days moved in a blur. Thomas submitted the final witness list to the court. Monica filed supplemental evidence. A local paper ran a brief mention of the case. No names, just the headline, "Decorated Veteran Challenges Family Guardianship Amid Financial Abuse Claims." I didn't request a correction. Sunday night, I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen window. The street outside was quiet. The sedan hadn't returned since Jake wrote his statement. Still, I kept my phone close recorder charged blinds halfway drawn. I didn't expect trouble, but I didn't leave the doors unlocked either. Just after 11, a final file came through from Monica. I opened it on my laptop. A clean chronological packet trust. Transactions, fake diagnosis, Jake's confession, my discharge forms, and 12 supporting testimonies. Everything in order. I read the names one last time. Each one grounded me. Then I closed the screen, turned off the light, and went to bed. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in a navy blazer and dark slacks. My boots were clean, the hem of my shirt pressed. I didn't wear anything on my sleeve, but the handkerchief stayed folded in my pocket just in case. At the courthouse, the gallery was already filling. Veterans in caps, neighbors from my old street, a couple of reporters near the back. My parents sat at the defense table, Celine beside them scrolling through her phone like she was waiting for a flight. Monica greeted me near the front row. She gave me a nod. Thomas adjusted his tie and leaned toward me. "They'll speak, one by one, but you close." I nodded. The judge entered robe, clean silver hair tucked behind her shoulders. She read the case title, then opened the floor. Monica stood. "We call Sergeant Major Samuel Ford." There was a soft shuffle in the back row. Ford stood and walked forward each step, measured his frame still upright after all these years. His uniform bore 6 campaign ribbons and a bronze star. He raised his right hand, swore in, and took the stand. "I led Ghost Echo 3rd Squad," he said, voice clear. Rachel Lawson was our senior medic. On August 9, 2006, during a convoy mission outside Kandahar, she directed a counter-route under fire and personally evacuated 6 wounded. I was one of them. He tapped the medal on his chest. "I survived because of her." Thomas asked, "In your judgment, is she competent to manage her own legal and financial affairs?" Ford didn't blink. She managed a field hospital in a moving Humvee. She could run this courthouse blindfolded. The gallery held still. Even Celine looked up. Ford turned to the judge. "With your permission, ma'am, I'd like to read from a declassified debrief." The judge nodded. He opened a folder and began. "Medic displayed exceptional field judgment, exceeding that of senior officers present. Contributed directly to successful extraction of all personnel." He closed the folder. "Anyone who says she's unfit hasn't seen what she can do." The room didn't move. The silence was deeper than quiet. It was respect. The judge turned to my father. "Mr. Lawson, we have notarized records showing more than $200,000 in withdrawals from your daughter's account. We also have a guardianship petition signed by a deceased physician. How do you explain that?" My father stood but didn't speak. His mouth opened, then closed. Celine shifted beside him, fingers frozen on her phone screen. Thomas turned to me and gave the cue. I walked forward. My heels didn't echo. My hands stayed steady. "I didn't come here to shame anyone," I said. "I came because silence is what allows this to keep happening." I paused, letting the next breath settle before continuing. "I served my country. I came home with scars like many do. I worked, paid taxes, helped others. My family took what was meant for my recovery and tried to rewrite the story, tried to label me broken so they could keep taking." I looked at the judge. "I'm not broken, and I'm not alone." She sat back, then nodded once. "This court freezes all trust assets pending criminal review, awards immediate restitution to Ms. Lawson, issues a protective order against further guardianship filings." My father sat down slowly. Celine stared at the floor tiles, unmoving. Outside the courthouse, the reporters waited. I didn't give interviews, but when a microphone reached toward me, I spoke quietly into it. "Tell the quiet ones they don't have to stay quiet." Then I walked down the steps and kept going. The courthouse emptied slow. A few veterans nodded to me as they left. One offered a quiet thank you before stepping out into the light. I didn't linger. Ford walked beside me to the edge of the lot where his truck idled under a canopy of red oak. A banner stretched across the fence behind us. "You are not forgotten." He nodded once and offered a hand. "You ever need backup again," he said, "you know where I am." I watched him drive off, taillights steady. Then I turned toward the parking deck. The next few weeks passed in motion. I signed documents, sat through phone calls, submitted every last piece of paperwork the VA needed to correct my record. Monica handled the federal side of the appeal. Thomas followed up on restitution. The trust was frozen, the assets sealed, but there was more to do. The damage hadn't just been financial. Word spread faster than I expected. My name showed up in a few newsletters. A veterans advocacy group published a short op-ed under my byline, just my initials at the bottom. No photos, no commentary, just a clear, direct account of what had happened and what to look for. I started volunteering once a week, walking new claimants through paperwork they didn't know how to fill out. Most of them had arms like mine, worn, scarred, still steady. I listened more than I talked. I knew what it meant to carry truth around like a weight. One afternoon, I found myself back at the old house. The furniture was gone, the walls bare. The realtor had left the front door key in a lockbox on the porch. I walked through each room slowly. My boots echoed in the hallway. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon oil. I stood in the living room for a long time, then reached into my bag and pulled out the framed copy of my commendation letter. I set it on the mantel. Not for them, for me. I turned to go, but just as I reached for the doorknob, a familiar voice came from behind me. "You don't know everything." Celine stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Her tone was even. Not sharp, but not soft either. "You think you got your truth," she said. "But you don't know about the second fund." I didn't speak, just waited. She took a step closer. "You think Mom and Dad told you everything? That all this came from them?" She looked around the room, then back at me. "You never did figure out who changed the discharge paperwork." I stood still, my hand resting lightly on the door frame. She tilted her head. "They didn't know how to do that, Rachel. They didn't even know the language." She paused, then said it. I did. It landed quiet, not loud, but it was enough. "I used your login once," she continued. "Back when you were still overseas. You had that old email account. I had the password from a form you left open." I didn't interrupt. I didn't think it would matter, just enough to dull the record. "Keep things quiet." She looked away. "Dad just signed what I gave him. He thought it was what you wanted. You were already different when you came back." I stayed by the door. She shrugged lightly. "It worked, didn't it? For a while, there wasn't anything else to say. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't offer regret. Just facts, like I'd done at the hearing." I turned the knob, stepped out onto the porch, and let the door close behind me. The air smelled like cut grass and something faintly metallic. The house behind me wasn't mine anymore, not just in title, but in weight. Back home, I opened the folder we'd been keeping for the federal appeal. I added a new page. Not a confession, just a signed affidavit sealed and time-stamped. Monica would know what to do with it. That evening, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. "This is Rachel." The voice was calm, professional. "Ms. Lawson, your discharge record has been officially amended. The commendation is attached to your updated file. We've also corrected the service category." A soft chime followed email confirmation. I thanked the caller, hung up, and opened the message. There it was, in black and white. "Senior Medic Ghost Echo Unit. Commendation for valor under fire." Attached were the orders that should have reached me 16 years earlier. I read them twice, then printed a copy and placed it beside the handkerchief I still kept in the drawer near the front door. Later that night, I heard from Ford again, just a short voicemail. "Proud of you. Took a lot more than firepower to pull this off. I saved it. Didn't respond right away." The next morning, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the window cracked just slightly open. Outside, the air was cool and still, the kind of quiet that didn't press down. It just sat with you. I looked over the stack of paperwork one last time. The record was whole, but I wasn't done yet. The article ran on a Thursday. Nothing flashy, just a quiet piece buried halfway through the local section. Headline read, "Former Army Medic Wins Discharge Appeal." After years of silence. My name wasn't in the byline, but I recognized the phrasing. Ford had passed my notes to a contact at the paper. They'd done it right. Facts, clean story, centered on the record, not the emotion. I didn't expect the phone calls. The first came from a woman in Chesapeake whose son had been discharged under similar circumstances. Then a voicemail from a retired Navy corpsman who said he remembered my unit's name from Kandahar. A teacher from Loudon left a message asking if I'd speak to her senior class something about civic process and perseverance. I agreed to a few, not all, just the ones where I could bring the handkerchief with me folded over the edge of the podium and let the silence between sentences say what the words didn't. Then the letter arrived. It was thick. Cream envelope embossed return address. The handwriting was my mother's. Inside were two things, a formal invitation to a family reconciliation brunch and a typed letter unsigned. It read like something drafted by an attorney and edited by someone trying to sound tender. We recognize that our actions caused you pain. We hope in time you'll allow space for healing. Your presence would mean a great deal to your father. There was no apology, no mention of Celine's role, no acknowledgement of the forged forms, the altered record, the trust funds rerouted under my name. Just an address, a date, and a note that said, "Family only. Please arrive before 11 for the private welcome." I set the letter down, looked at the envelope again. In the corner, faint but visible, was the family crest my father insisted on using for formal communications, an old military insignia he'd modified when he started the estate planning fund. The same crest that had once appeared on the paperwork stripping me of my benefits. The brunch was scheduled for Sunday. I arrived 10 minutes early, not out of respect, out of clarity. I didn't want anyone to say I came in with bad intentions. The estate had been sold, but the gathering was at a country club just outside the old neighborhood. Valets again. White columns, a fountain that hadn't been drained yet for winter. I parked in the back lot and walked in through the side entrance. The hostess looked up from her clipboard. "Lawson." I nodded. She tilted her head toward the north dining wing. "They're waiting for you." Inside, a long table stretched beneath low chandeliers. My father sat at the far end, dressed in a dark suit, hands folded on the tablecloth. Celine was already standing, holding a glass of orange juice. My mother hovered near the fireplace, smoothing the sleeve of her cardigan. As I entered, the conversation quieted. I didn't sit. Instead, I reached into my bag and took out a copy of the article. Folded neatly, edges aligned. I placed it on the table beside a vase of chrysanthemums. My father looked down at it, then back at me. No one spoke. I glanced at my mother. She offered a faint smile. "We thought this could be a turning point." I kept my voice steady. "It already was, just not here." Celine lowered her glass. "You're still angry?" "No, just clear." My father shifted in his chair. "There are things you don't understand." "I do now," I said. I turned slightly, pulling a second envelope from my coat. Inside was the notarized affidavit Celine had signed, acknowledging her part in the altered discharge. I placed it gently beside the article. Then I set down the handkerchief. No words, just the cloth folded, once the stitching still visible after all these years. My father blinked slowly. My mother said nothing. "I'm not here for reconciliation," I said quietly. "I'm here to return what isn't mine to carry." I stepped back from the table. No raised voices, no accusations. Just silence, thick and unmoving. As I turned to leave, Celine called after me. "This is still your family." I paused at the threshold. "Then you should have protected it better." I left before the meal was served. Outside, the air was sharp with November cold. My breath fogged in front of me as I walked to the car. A message buzzed on my phone as I started the engine. It was from Monica. "Appeal fully resolved. Final file sealed. You're in the clear." I sat there a moment before pulling away. The club faded in the rearview mirror. Ahead, the road opened back toward the city, quiet and long. The past wasn't erased, but it no longer owned the shape of my life. It took a while before I stopped looking over my shoulder. Even after the papers were finalized, even after my name was cleared, I kept expecting someone to call and say it had all been a mistake, that I had to come back, that I owed something more. But the calls never came. Instead, my days settled into something simple. Mornings with a warm mug in hand, watching the streetlights go dim. Walks through the neighborhood where no one knew what had happened, and no one asked. I started volunteering at the community clinic on Thursdays, helping with intake paperwork, listening when someone needed to talk. It wasn't dramatic work, but it mattered. I heard through Monica that Celine had taken a job in Chicago. some kind of non-profit board appointment. My parents stayed in Virginia, though they'd moved into a smaller house near the lake. There was no more contact, no more invitations. But there wasn't bitterness either, just quiet. That brunch, that final moment with the envelope, the article and the handkerchief, it had taken something out of me. But it gave something back, too. A boundary, a clean line. For the first time in years, I knew where I stood, and it wasn't in their shadow. I kept the old truck. I liked the rattle in the driver's door and the way the radio only worked on AM. One afternoon, I drove out to a park a few towns over where veterans met on weekends. No speeches, just cards, coffee, a little bit of silence when needed. I sat beside a woman who wore her hair cropped close and kept her hands folded on her lap. "You're Lawson?" she asked after a while. I nodded. She didn't say anything more, just nodded back. That was enough. Some days I still carried the handkerchief, not as a shield, not as proof, just as a thread, a small, worn square stitched by someone who'd seen the worst in the world and chose to leave behind something kind. I don't have a big message, no banner or battle cry, just this. Sometimes justice doesn't look like punishment. Sometimes it's a quiet breath, a cleared name, a day where you can look in the mirror and see yourself whole again. If you've ever had to fight to be seen not as what they said you were, but as who you truly are, I hope you find your own kind of peace, however long it takes. And if this story stayed with you, I'd be honored if you shared it or left a comment. You never know who might need to hear it next. Thank you for listening.